Hello, good afternoon. It's Joyful Hermit. It's April 2nd, and that is the celebration day for a man called Francis of Paula. The town, I think, in Italy, or the area is Paola. Looks like Paola, but it's pronounced Paula, and I noticed it's been written as Paula, Paula, in this one notification I get. But would be back in 2009 today. I was over in Austria visiting a priest. He had been a seminarian in India that my son and I had sponsored two different ones with a religious order, trying to think of, I think they were from St. Francis de Sales, something. Anyway, no, they were Vincentians, St. Vincent de Paul. And a priest had come from India to our parish in the Midwest, and right when we were new Catholics, and had talked about it only took $25 a month to educate a seminarian in India. So I talked to my son about it. If we would sacrifice desserts and soda pop and give up going to Burger King, maybe we could go once a month or something if we had a 2-for-1 coupon or something, special coupon. And also, if we did go out, or we'd give up pizza, whatever it took to come up with $25 a month for each of us. And I made a big jar, and I put bingo on it because I said this can remind us of the money people waste on bingo, hoping to win big. And we'll put our money in, any loose change we have, or if he had an odd job, he could contribute if he wanted, into this jar. And we'd come up with $50 a month and send it. So we did that for several years. And these young men got out and were priests. And the one, I kept in touch with them. They actually wrote to me, and I wrote back, and kept up with them. And one realized I could do FaceTime, or it wasn't FaceTime then. It was something else that we could see. Skype, that's what it was called, Skype, where we could talk and see each other. And he was stunned that I looked young. I was maybe 60. What would that be? 15 years ago it was. So I was about 57, 58, or 58, maybe 59. And he was startled that I looked in good shape. Of course, I did back then. I hadn't been through the island experience yet. But he invited me over. And my mother had died, so I went over. And yes, I wiped out. Still didn't have any pain meds then, but I took a lot of Aleve with me. By then, I was taking lots of Aleve and Excedrin. And he knew I would have to take it easy. But I got over there, and I was stunned with the status of his priesthood. And I had taken him a collector item book. I think it might have been like an old copy of, I forget which book it was even. Maybe it was Francis de Sales, not The Devout Life, On the Love of God. I think it was that one. And I'd gotten a first edition copy, and I could tell he was just not at all interested in it. And I felt bad. And then he just did his computer. He had a computer. And I had taken my little 13-inch laptop with me. And he was just enthralled with that laptop. He had a computer that the parish gave him, desktop, and enthralled with that laptop. Well, at the end, I gave it to him. I just gave it to him. I had been through a harrowing experience It's a long story. I won't go into all of that, but I will tell you at some point. It's probably the freakiest and most horrific thing I've been through, the closest to dying, of being murdered. Um, um, where a friend that I'd known from high school who was an exchange student and lived in Germany arranged for me to have their vacation apartment down on the Mediterranean in a little village called Gien, France. And Thomas even flew to Vienna and for a weekend to see me and to make sure I got all set up, to bring me the keys and everything I would need, and even helped me understand the trains I would take to get there from Vienna. And took me around Vienna, the two of us, and it was fun to see him after years of not seeing him. He had come back to the Midwest a few times to visit his host family, but I hadn't seen him in several years. And it was just delightful. And his wife couldn't come. They were both teachers. So anyway, but something happened then in Gien that, anyway, it was the whole thing. Well, it involved also my meeting someone on the train going right out of Vienna before even Salzburg, and seeing a priest who was in his priest cleric outfit, looked like a priest. And I met him and talked with him on the train of my upset with the priesthood in Vienna, at least in Vienna. And Submission had taken me other places too. He took me, he was a wonderful host. And I told him that's really all I was interested in, was monasteries and anything religious, And I didn't say anything about my mystical whatever, any of that at all. But I just said he asked what I wanted to see, and that was what I wanted to see, were things like that. So such rich heritage in Catholicism and history. And then I also, Thomas had arranged and figured out, how I could get off at the train at Annecy, where St. Francis de Sales and St. Jane de Chantal were. And they're buried, their bodies are there, and they lived there, and the monastery and where he was bishop, the place he lived, and the cathedral. So anyway, but I'll tell that story another time. But this priest was instrumental in really saving my life in a miraculous way, the one that I met on the train. But he told me, yes, he says it can be distressing here with the priesthood, and because I said he had left out of his masses, hardly anyone came to his parish, and he didn't care. Submission. And it was a well-to-do parish on the edge of Vienna, and he had a nice parsonage rectory where he let me stay, and he was a wonderful host, a wonderful young man. I think what had happened is that he just realized he could just do what he wanted. It was the first place he had been sent from being ordained, and I guess he looked around and saw all the other priests were doing the same. So he was interested in his computer. He was on that most of the time when he wasn't taking me places. He did take me wonderful places. And but even his mass, I'd say, why aren't you having these other readings? The scriptures. He would do the gospel, but often would leave off the Psalms and the epistle reading, he says, people, they don't want to stay down. They're not interested. They're not interested in anything here, So part of it, I think he had just thrown in the towel that the people weren't. And I said, but you can get them excited about it. You can draw them in. Talked about St. John Vianney and how he went around to every parishioner and got, because he was into his laptop. Did we have cell phones then? Yes, we did. He had a cell phone. not the iPhones we have now, but anyway, that was so upsetting. And I also happened to be that his superior came to see him then, and that was distressing to meet that man. And he tried to shine me on, older man from India, a priest, and the superior of, or the head of the seminary or something. But there was something going on not good with that man and submission. And it wasn't good. So I won't go into all that, but I could hardly stand being in that man's presence for all the behind the stuff, and submission just was taken by him, just taken in a not good way, not healthy. The man wanted to know, this superior priest, I'll give him that credit, wanted to know, what I was visiting. Yes, and submission said, yes, she and her son sacrificed and put me and another one that this priest also knew of, had been in seminary, through all seminary. And I decided I was going to tell them what we sacrificed, what my son, it wasn't terrible, but we didn't have much then either. We rarely had anything fun. One time my mother had called and she said, why don't you guys get some pizza? I said, well, Mom, I just don't have the money. Her call, my John, my dad, she doesn't even have money for a pizza. And here comes $25 with a little note on the check. Get a pizza, Well, we could get 2 back then for that. But no, I had to be very frugal. I had 2 daughters in college. And at the time that we were putting them through, then my mother had died, and then I was able to take that trip, fly over there. And I had a little laptop. That was nice. I could afford some things then. But, and my son was in college, but I had my parent loans and he had grants and things. Well, no, I guess yes. No, he was out of college then. So I was doing okay financially, but I wanted that older man to know. And because he didn't have his 3 prongs plugged in the outlet, and submission didn't, and it was so upsetting to see. But I'll not go in more of that. That was that situation. But and that was why I saw the priest and his clerics on the train and was like, oh, maybe he'll know what's going on here with the priests in this whole area. And it turned out that the priest was an Opus Dei priest. He was had been born in New York, of Austrian parents, but he had dual citizenship, but he lived in Austria then, was a priest with Opus Dei. And because submission had taken me to that church down in Vienna where he was, and I when he says that was his parish, I said, oh, I've been there to that beautiful church. I was drawn to that. And I said, I noticed there they looked like priests and they had confession and all these lines of confession. And my priest friend, young man, didn't do any confessions, no times for confession. He said, oh, no one does here. They don't come. It's a waste of time. And, but boy, they were in lines waiting for confession at this one church. Well, all the Catholics that were plugged in would go there because they knew those priests were living the life, living the faith. So, but to say what happened later, I got back in touch with him oh, it's probably been 10, but it was after. He was back in India. And he was, I had said something to him on the way to the airport, finally. And I'd given him my laptop as a thank you for all his generosity of time and taking me around to places I would want to go in and pray or look around. And he just said, wasn't, but he let me know. It must have shaken him what I said. At the time, he did, what do you mean? He said, what? I said, oh, just, because I said, well, you've got a good setup here, which was all he had, was just a good deal. And he got further education there. He got a doctorate there, paid for by the diocese. The Vienna diocese had plenty of money, lots of money. But their priests just weren't, and the people, evidently, not all of them, not enough of them, but they could be sparked. Anyone can be. But it takes the leaders. That's what leadership is. That's the main area of my doctorate from USC, was organizational leadership. So I know techniques leaders can use. And think of John Vianney. He got those people coming even before he had a lot of miraculous graces himself that drew people from all over France. But he went around, he got all those people back to church in his village, in ours. So it can be done. But someone needs to have the fire. And it needs to be burning already for Jesus, as he says. So that's why I keep hounding on, get the spiritual in you. Get the spiritual going. And devotions of whatever, meditations, they're good. I know another viewer, he's doing meditations of how Joseph and Mary felt during this time, even though Joseph had died, but how he would have felt on the other side, knowing what his son was going through, and what Mary felt being alive while her son was being persecuted and then murdered on a cross, cruelly, in front of so many people, stripped nearly naked. So suffering like that when he was beautiful, her son, and perfect God. So anyway, but submission, when we talked later, or we emailed or something, texted, he was working, he was back in India and working at a major retreat center. And the other young man had been there, and he was, I think he was probably a mystic, very holy young man, priest, and he was one of the leaders of this. But Subishan was working there as a priest and hearing confessions, and it was a place that was known to have a lot of miracles. And the people from India thronged there. It was alive. So I realized part of Subishan's not doing much was feeling like the people in Vienna didn't care, so why should I? Which, of course, isn't the attitude needed. But he was young, and I could tell then he had grown, and I was grateful, praised God, that he was back in India, where he was more motivated, and very highly motivated. In fact, he was being the priest that God wanted him to be. So it turned out well. But anyway, on April 2nd, though, that would be 15 years ago today, he took me to a monastery, and they had Stations of the Cross, beautiful carvings, maybe from the 14th century. And they had this probably was 14th century or 15th, a big statue of Francis of Paola, or Paula there. And I knew it was his feast day that day. And I got all excited and was telling Subishan about it. And about his life, and what a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence that there we were. I had never seen anything of him really in the United States. He's Italian, but Father Submission says, oh, yes, he, you know, was more a major person there. So there we were on his feast day, and I was just thrilled. And I took a picture on my little digital camera, and it's on some kind of a gimmick that you have to plug into the computer. I don't know how to download it in. I wouldn't have room to do videos if I had all those photos in, but it was a wonderful, wonderful trip until that had to be cut short because of what happened in France. But and Submission really cared. We cared about each other tremendously, obviously. That, and I didn't let on, but that was just the one thing that I found distressing. And it wasn't just him. It was, and I asked him. He says, "Oh well, I think he got together with other priests now and then." He says, "That's how they all. The masses are all like that, you know." Like, just okay. We just leave this out. We don't do confessions. You know, if not enough people come, we don't. Or if we think people are bored, and I think he only had mass maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and a lovely chapel there, a little church there, and I did go, but when he did celebrate mass, and it was maybe 15 minutes long is all. Oh, I don't think he even gave a sermon. The people aren't interested. They don't want to wait. They want to get back home or go to work. It's like, I said, well, you could have mass in the evening. Oh, they wouldn't come. But he was on that computer. Anyway, mother me wasn't, like, was expecting, but he's plugged in now, or he was last time we spoke. Very plugged in and all enthused. And that also is another thing to consider. These priests that are in religious orders, and people in the different churches in the United States hire them, pay money to get them sent over here because we need more priests. And somebody, in Austria they had to get priests in Vienna. So but we have to understand, maybe they aren't eager for that hired in, hire a priest kind of situation. And it's a difficult situation. We need more priests in this country. And in Austria, they needed more, obviously, because he was sent to Austria to fill in. But it must be hard for priests to be called to another country, especially when they're young and their interest is maybe more in their own country, or they're more used to their own people, and they feel like the parishes there are better, or I don't know. I don't know what the psychology is behind it all, but now Father Vincent, he's an amazing soul, very amazing. So it just depends on all of us, and we go through phases. We do. I slipshod for a year or so. A year ago, was very not plugged in. So, but anyway, that's why I today I thought about Francis of Paula. I had already read a book about him, about his life, and it was quite detailed, the little paperback I had. And somebody had mentioned who is going to be confirmed on the 7th of April. And he joined our site. He watches some of the videos, and he's going to be Catholic in about 5 days or 4 days. 5 days, the 7th. And he was interested in hermit life and in asceticism. Well, Francis of Paula, whose feast day is today, and he died in 1508. He was born in 1444, I think it was, and in France, in Italy, and he, at a very young age, maybe 15, I think he started out as a hermit. He wanted to be a hermit. He left home and lived as an ascetic and as a hermit. And by ascetic, we mean he was very austere and lived a very simple and humble life, very stripped back. And after a while, he did have some followers, and he had this community, and they're called the Minims, Minims, the Minims. And he was the founder, meaning minimalists, or they needed minimum. They were very austere. But Francis of Paola traveled about, and he became very famous for having miraculous gifts, but also for his being an ascetic, very austere. He ate herbs, boiled herbs. He never ate any fish, no eggs, no meat. He had bread and usually herbs, some potatoes, not necessarily potatoes, but some vegetables, but a lot of herbs in boiling water, like an herb soup. Herbs and bread, that was his main diet. He didn't have a place to live particularly that he stayed. He would travel, wander, walk. But he prayed, he meditated, he contemplated, and then people started being drawn to him and his asceticism. And but he really took it. He was very extreme with it, very austere, very extreme. Francis was. And when I think when he was born, his mother, he was born under unusual circumstances. His mother couldn't conceive, and she had prayed and prayed, and she conceived, but she had a dream. I think that that's how it went, that she had a son, was going to have a son, and that he would be a religious. So, and that came to pass. But he would be called by different leaders, the king, other religious leader at one point would consult with him, because he really came to know God through austerity. That was sort of his path, was through extreme asceticism, self-denial, dying to self. He made it a point and a pattern of life to come to God through that mode. He always wore a hair shirt under a tunic. It was rough, would scratch and be bothersome, but he got used to it. Some would wear cinctures around, a tight rope or even a chain, women and men. Well, I did for a while. Well, it was 4 or 5 years. I wore around my waist I went through a very austere period, extreme. I think it was after I had been the hermit in that community of St. Bruno, and then I knew that the diocese was doing this behind my back investigation rather than just calling the Vicar General in England to find out it was an okay situation. But I had found out myself. The Lord let me know. Through concrete means, though, through temporal means, that the woman who started it really didn't have it together. She didn't have the statutes done yet. I'd been in it for nearly a year. And I'd offered to help her write them. I knew my diocese would need something like that. And there was some woman in New York who got in. Her diocese didn't mind that they had nothing, or that this woman didn't have it really. But she had other aspects of it organized, especially the reading we were to do and the orarium we were to have. And we would correspond back and forth. And I really, let's see, we didn't do email, we wrote. But she was disobedient to her vicar general, though. I found that out. He had told her she wasn't to call herself prioress at all because it was just starting up. You know, if it made it through the first step of approval, a new order has to be approved, a new community, and it can take up to 30 years. But she hadn't even done the very first level yet. And her superior, who was the vicar general, who was helping to sponsor this community, it was a great idea, but she hadn't obeyed him. But I mentioned it to her then, and she got very angry. She had a lot of pride and flipped out that I was going to leave, not follow through, because I realized that the canon law thing wasn't for me. But I also didn't, wearing the habit, we were to wear a habit at a certain point. She told me exactly what I was to do, but I wasn't told to notify my diocese until I was going in the novice phase and had the habit on for a while. Well, I didn't understand that would create all kinds of havoc in the hometown with the people in the parish writing letters to the bishop that I was in mortal sin and stuff for wearing a habit when I wasn't a religious. And they didn't know because I did what I was told by the woman, how she had set it up. Well, the woman in New York didn't have any problem. The other ones in Europe who were in this community, there were maybe 13 of us by then, dotted around. It was international, but as hermits. But but I did get an excellent training for that year. She did that very, very well. Had it very organized, and we did it on our own. I had to have a spiritual director, which I did, my spiritual job, but and I took it very seriously. So it was all good in that regard. But it was after that I gave up the habit. I'd already given away all my clothes. I had some overalls, so I just sewed a gray jumper, because the morning I did it, the morning I realized that this wasn't right for me. This community wasn't, and I sensed that she wasn't going to make it very much longer, because you have to be organized with your statutes and have your ducks in order if you're going to develop a community in our time period that's going to be approved. So, and I knew then that it would be unlikely, even if the bishop or whatever approved of me being in this, they couldn't find out anything about it. But they didn't call and ask that I'd put the vicar general, who was, and where he was in England, and he was near Parkminster, the Carthusian. But I called, got right through, found out it was legitimate and all, and also then found out that the woman hadn't. I didn't tell her vicar general she wasn't obedient, but I let her know that was one thing that did bother me some, that we were to be obedient to her, but she wasn't being obedient to her vicar general. She was calling herself the prioress and had stationery with it printed. She had all that stuff for her ego, but she didn't have the statutes written up. And I could have written them in an afternoon for her, but because by then the reading list we had was vast, and I did all that reading. So I knew the Carthusians, and what kind of statutes they would want, and that would be appropriate, Carthusian style. But anyway, so I didn't have anything to wear, and the Lord that morning had told me, let go, my poor gray dove. I thought, gray. So my daughter had given me a simple jumper, and it was still in the closet, and I just used that. It was her jumper. I used that as a pattern, and just got $1 a yard fabric at Walmart, 60-inch, took a yard or a yard and a half. It was for $1.50. I had an outfit to wear, and I was so into gray. I dyed everything gray. I had gray t-shirt, gray jumper, and I had corduroy one for winter and a lightweight one for summer and fall and spring, and heavy, warmer one. Went to Goodwill, got a coat for winter, gray. Everything was gray for the gray dove, my poor gray dove. And my head was shorn when I took my veil off. And I went into a very austere period. Tennis shoes, gray socks. I dyed my white socks gray, and lived that way for a few years. And from 2000, no, would have been, it was 2000 until, it was for 5 years. I lived very austerely like that. Externally, no makeup, no. Then I realized, then I stood out for being austere. So I don't recommend it for our time. If you want to go unnoticed, and I did consider what Jesus said even about fasting, and don't go about looking like you're doing that. But Francis of Paula, it worked for him in his time period. It drew attention to him. It truly did. Some people thought he was crazy and too extreme, but his spiritual life grew. That worked for him, for his spiritual life. And he was visiting the king at one point, but the king had this ulterior motive. He wanted to break Francis. He offered him eggs. He offered him this wonderful fish to eat, all this. So the whole time that the king wanted some advice, and Francis could have given it, instead was spent with Francis being determined he was not going to take one bite of anything that king offered him. So it became sort of a battle of the wills. That was in the book I read, all these details of his life. And so when I read that, I realized he was fortunate. It was practically foretold to his mother that he would be very ascetic. But in our day and time, homeless people are like that. But if you want to be a hermit in our time and go unnoticed and be, as the Catechism says, which was taken from Hermit of the 3rd century, hidden from the eyes of men, looking different isn't going to cut it. And then that will start interfering. Take it from me. I went through that with the austere phase, plus with the habit. You still stand out. And then you're no longer unnoticed. But for Francis, it worked. It was his way. And he was able to heal. He had the gift of healing. He had various miracles. He could foretell the future. And he became very, very holy. Now, I think we can be austere without having it be a temporally noticed kind of austerity. just to work on the aspect of being single-minded of purpose of God, to live the greatest commandment can be an austerity, with our minds and our hearts focused on God, and that God is above all things. Love of God and love of others as God loves them. Back to where I was months ago talking about loving God in himself. Learning that is a type of austerity, to not just give up things, but to love God so much that to eat our food, yes, we do it, it doesn't matter to us that much. It isn't now spoiled food or food that's horrible or questionable. I think we have to be concerned. We don't want to, at least me, I can't get more sick. I've had food poisoning one time and it was horrible. And the way my intestines are, maybe they wouldn't do well at all with that kind of problem, with food poisoning on top. They're already bad. But so I do think we have to be discerning. But it's the mind austerity that we can, the single-minded focus on God. But I wore this cincture then also, and it was fairly tight. It was one of those stretch things with hooks. One of those band things, that you can, I don't know what they're called, bungee thing, but it was a short one, and it had the wrapped metal twisties and then the hooks, so they would gouge in on my body, and I would spend hours in front of the tabernacle, but I was renting. I didn't have anything I had to do, which was good, but the manual labor can be an austerity too. It's been I've had to grow up with this crack in the wall. I'm on my 5th day working on it. I mudded it again, a thin feather coating, and I'm going to still have to touch up. I still don't know if it's going to crack through again. But I had to do practically half the wall, because when I was fixing the one area, you have to smooth coat it. You can't just have something that is going to pop out, or something, or fissure on the wall, because, or even, have even a slight mound there, because the lights go right across there too. So I have to have my light fixture be able to go up flat. So I had to really fine coat from the ceiling down maybe 4 feet or more, when the crack was at maybe the 2-foot mark, to bevel it, to feather coat out. So it's taken several coats and different types of drywall mud, one that's very hardens like cement, that I had to beat with my drill and a beater, and then clean all that out, and make sure nothing gets down the sink that would clog my sink. And it was a lot of effort. And who was behind it? Someone who didn't hang the drywall right to begin with. So I had to do forgiving of the person and remind myself that the person can't focus, and he's wounded, and his ego is trying to keep him going from being so rejected from his wife and others probably, and it's ADHD and has trouble focusing, and but also realized I can't have any more of this, so there won't be more, but I'm doing it. And then I had to get my attitude turned around. And I don't know, I'm not Francis of Paula, but I really think it would be easy. Of course, I eat austere. Eating doesn't matter. But I've had to start to eat healthier now, because my blood test showed I was low in protein. I was way off on all kinds of stuff. um, and anemic, so I hadn't been eating right. I barely ate before. I just wasn't interested. It didn't matter. I wasn't depressed or anything. I don't care in general, but I had to start doing that. I had to, we have to start thinking, is it worth being more sickly? Francis, he probably had a grace. He lived, I don't know, what was he, 67, 69 or something? No, he was older. I think he was even older than that. But maybe he was 91 even. No, that was Hugh, Saint Hugh. I'm getting my saints confused, but um, he was healthy enough. But I learned a lot those 5 years in austerity, that the mental and the emotional of training that is more difficult than, after a while I forgot about the cincture thing. My jumper, of course, I loved that. That was easy. I just, get up, put it on. Had two things. Well, I had two, so I could do one wash and then have another. Two for summer and two for winter that I sewed. And so that was a total of $6 I spent. I already had gray thread. Very, life was easy. Wore black tennis shoes with gray socks, but I had become a distraction, even in the city I went to. And even the bishop, they thought that I was like a street person who wasn't right in the head. So one time the bishop introduced himself to me because he noticed me going in to Mass at the chapel and had noticed me before. And I had my Goodwill coat on, my gray coat. Oh, it was a great one. Evan Picone. I got it for $8. And it was long. I loved it. It was heavy wool. It's a deal at Goodwill. And then I thought it was in good shape, but it was gray since I was in all gray. And it reminded me of that Seinfeld show where what's the funny guy, the big guy, where he had his a tooth out or something. His mouth was swollen, so he talked funny. Could barely talk. And people started thinking he was handicapped, so they invited him. They made him, I think, like the recipient of some award at a dinner for handicapped people. And they brought a lot of humor into it. I don't know if they would do it today. It would probably be very politically incorrect, but it was funny because that guy wasn't at all mentally impaired, but the way he talked, people all assumed he was. Well, here's this bishop. Oh, hello. Well, I've seen you here before, talking slowly, like I was totally incompetent and couldn't understand. And now, and my car that my mother had purchased me before she had died was used, but it was a nice little Buick LeSabre. But the engine had blown on it. That was to keep me in a certain area. It was not a normal occurrence it was a fairly new car. It was used, but new, not old. But anyway, and we'd had this huge snowstorm. So in order to get to there, I took the bus, the city bus, because I rented down by the parish down this street where further down that the cathedral was later up on. And so he saw me get off the bus, and he just made all these assumptions of me. And started to say something, and I tried to tell him, that I wasn't what he thought, and I said something about, he says, well, now tell me. I said, well, I have a doctor. Oh, a doctor. So you're a doctor. I said, well, no, just, doctorate and educate. Well, what school? I said, well, USC. And he thought I was just making it up to some street person who was mentally off. Oh, that's an important school. He patted my hand and we went in, and it wasn't a whole lot longer after that I had to go in and take things to validate, because I had to report this priest. But and then they found out that I wasn't that. I mean, it's humorous, but then also I realized it wasn't right to deceive people because I was wanting to be austere. I had gotten that idea to be austere, and so I'm not recommending it. Anyway, I wanted to talk about Francis of Paula and ended up talking about my existence. But that day, that statue, and Sebastian took a photo of me standing by. He was life-size statue, made a stone one of Saint Francis of Paula. But I love his story, and it was his path, though, to union, to, I don't know if he had union, yeah, I would say he probably did, to being close to God, because nothing else mattered to him. And I have to say, my way, I was probably, maybe had I stayed in austerity, but it did become a distraction because God had other things for me to do. And had I gone in as the person that they thought I was, when I needed to be valid to explain about this priest who needed to be removed, and other things, it was really deceptive on it was too deceiving of people. And others commented later, well, when I put on regular clothes, the priest at the morning mass, I later went to the door of the rectory for something, I forget what, and he goes, "It's you." He says, "I was trying to figure out who was that attractive, nice woman, well-dressed woman back there." And I said, "Yes, it's me." And it was just a total different switch. But it's harder when we have to be ourselves. But it seems fair that we exist in our socioeconomic and at our education level, and have our austerities be subtle, more subtle, and the higher challenging ones. Giving up certain foods, after a while, and if you suffer enough, you could care less about any of it, and I'm so worn out. I finally got into something else today, but I often I'm too tired at night to change. I just fall asleep and doze off. I'm up a lot off and on in the night. So Francis slept on a stone. Well, I used to sleep on the floor. My back just had gotten so bad. Now that it's fused halfway up, I sleep on it. But I liked sleeping on a floor. I have no trouble sleeping on a floor. But it's not necessary, it's but for Francis that worked. But anyway, just different people in their lives, and just interesting things to consider with our spiritual lives. But that was Francis of Paula. So God bless his real presence in us, and we'll talk to you another time. God bless you. I went all over the place on this, and I am so proud of Sebastian, and grateful that my son and I helped put them through seminary. It was a great accomplishment. I hope my son will remember that, of the sacrifices back before my parents had passed and we were tight. And that's a wonderful way to sacrifice But there's all kinds of sacrifices, all kinds of ways to be austere. This is for the person who is fascinated with hermits and austerity. And we sort of have to pray about what is the point, especially of external austerities. What is the point, and has God called us to that? And what are some more intrinsic ways that we can please God and grow in holiness that won't be noticed and won't stay at such a temporal level also? Austerity should bring us more inward and to God in that regard. All for God. God bless His real presence in us. Lovey wants up. Mercy stays quiet. She knows her brother will do the dirty work and whine and carry on to get me up. I'm stopping now, Lovey. You'll get out soon here, in a minute or less.